they cook their burgers well done, right? I spend money on food. I spend money on the things I really love, and I've spent an obscene amount of money on food, and I've spent a lot of money on travel. Those are the things I care about. I could care less what car I drive.
You're listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, where you'll hear the stories and interviews of everyday millionaires. We'll unveil their decisions, their strategies, and their current portfolio allocation. Now to your hosts, Clark Sheffield and Jace Mattinson.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. This is episode number 282. Hope everybody's having a great President's Day out there. Before we get into the details of today's episode, just kind of wanted to take a moment and, we announced early, I guess it was late summer, early fall, that Clark would be stepping away from the podcast. And so we've kind of arrived at that point, more or less. There's a few interviews that I may release from the archives that he and I did back in the day together in the last couple months. But for the most part, Clark will kind of make an exit at this point. And with that, over the last several months, I've been talking to various parties and have selected a new co-host or main co-host who we're going to introduce today. We'll get to know him. In fact, we're going to tell his millionaire story today, interview that I did with him. And then also a little update. We've had several emails and requests from guests and from listeners who want to know a little bit more about the host. So I did a little bit of follow-up as well, kind of update on me and a little bit of my journey. So that's the episode that we have planned today. It's going to be great. I also wanted to chime in. We will have, I've had a couple that I've recorded that my wife will participate in as well. So you get to hear a little bit different voice and a little bit different kind of background and questions. So anyway, we've got a lot of great stuff planned for 2023. I know we're just kind of getting into the early parts of the year here, but a lot of exciting things, a lot of great guests coming up. And you're going to hear a new voice here today and for several subsequent episodes with Brad. So really excited about that. In fact, just to give a little background on Brad was a listener, and you'll hear that in his interview. And, I met with Brad a couple different occasions. I guess really one occasion out in California. I happened to be traveling out there, and so we aligned schedules. But he's got a great background. He sold timeshares. He worked at Best Buy, played golf in college. He had about $500,000 in school loans when he was 28. And, now he's a multimillionaire. He's got a couple $100,000 in savings, about $800,000 in the market split between stocks and mutual funds and index funds, and then about $1 million in real estate between his primary residence and a couple Airbnbs. So great story with Brad and a great interview with him. And then also you'll get to know him, as I mentioned, more and more, or get to know him better more and more over several episodes. So a little bit of a different background than Clark had, but it's going to be a great co-host arrangement with Brad. So that takes care of this part. All right, that takes care of this piece. We have had a few people write in too, and I just wanted to give an update. Clark is still doing well. He and I are still best of friends. In fact, ironically, a couple weeks ago, I was vacationing down in Mexico, and my wife happened to say something, and one thing led to another, and Clark started texting me about, vacations and all this kind of stuff, and it seemed a little odd, but I was like, I didn't think much of it, and next thing I know, he's walking up to me on the beach, so we got to hang out with each other for a little bit of time in Mexico, unplanned, and catch up and stuff, so he's doing well. And maybe every so often we'll get him to make a guest appearance or something to pop in and say hi. I know there's several people out there who have enjoyed him over the years, and I've definitely enjoyed doing the podcast with him. But yeah, the podcast isn't going anywhere. Keep rocking and rolling. Obviously, if you'd want to be on the podcast, send us an email at millionairesunveiled@gmail.com. We're always looking for new great guests. Still looking for that multi-millionaire for our 300th episode, hopefully here coming up in not too long, actually. I mean, we've got 16, 18 weeks here before that'll release. So would love to get somebody on for that. At any rate, appreciate you all. And without any further delay, let's get into the episode with my new co-host, Brad.
Brad, you want to just give everybody a little bit about your background and how this kind of all came about a little bit?
Yeah, thanks, Jace. Super excited to be on the podcast. I'm a longtime fan, and I, came here because I reached out to you and wanted to talk about how much I loved the show, and it's just kind of blossomed from there. We met in San Diego, and we have a lot in common, and happy to talk about my background and how I became a millionaire. And I'm super excited to meet the guests in the future and contribute. My background, basically, I'm from the Midwest. My family are all dentists. They're the poorest dentists you'll ever know. They have no relationship with money other than give the money to the financial advisor. For me, business and money have always been a big part of my life, but so is debt. When I moved out here to California, where I live now, I came here for law school. And, I met my wife the first day, which was good. But I also like to say that I doubled my debt that day. We ended law school. Neither of us became lawyers. I went right into business. I knew I made a mistake, but I started my time out here in California after school saddled with a ton of debt. So my net worth was, if we had a podcast for negative 500,000 heirs. That's what I was.
Hold on here a second. So you graduated law school. Did you have undergrad debt as well?
I had a little bit, but for the most, I played golf in college and, had some scholarship. But yeah, I had very little. And I had 5 years in between undergrad and grad school. So I had some time to pay off some of that debt.
And were you just working then?
Yeah, I was in sales for 5 years. So if you want to hear some funny timeshare closes, I actually sold timeshare for a year before I learned to sell. Yeah. I could tell you guys the wedding close. That'd be pretty funny. And and I worked for Best Buy for a while. Decided I needed to go back to school. So everybody told me law school was a good education. And, being as I'm an alpha, I looked at the U.S. News and World Report and I saw the upper salary range. And I said, that'll be me. I won't be on the lower salary range. And I thought that's as much research as I did. And then I applied to schools that weren't near me because I wanted to get out of my small town. And I looked at Pepperdine on a brochure, and I knew that Malibu is where Baywatch was, so I knew it couldn't be a bad thing. And that's the school I got into. So, yep.
And you were 27, 28 at the time?
I was 25 when I started law school.
25. So did you graduate college early?
Yeah, I finished when I was like 21, 22. I guess it was only 3-4 years. Maybe it was 3-4 years. I'm old, so time is.
Yeah. You start losing. You start slipping. I get
That's
you.
right.
So your early 20s. You go to law school at 25. 3 years. Graduate 28, roughly.
Yeah, I actually added my MBA in there, and then I took night school and stuff. I finished in just over 3 years. And while I was in law school, I did about 20 internships and to figure out what I wanted to do, and I found my space. So I started at this startup in Santa Monica, and my boss was 4 years older than me, but I got a job just before the market crashed. And all my friends in law school, they graduated and didn't have jobs because the recession had just hit, or the market had just crashed. And I had a job playing ping pong and drinking coffee all day with younger people than myself, and got really lucky.
Holy cow. So
yeah.
28, $500,000 in debt, or was it more?
It was about $500,000. Yeah.
$500,000. Good night.
Mm-hmm.
So $500,000 at 28, and then you decide that you're basically not going to be a lawyer after you spend all that time and money to go to law school. So how did you reconcile all that in your head, and what was the thought process of digging out of that hole?
Well, it's interesting. My wife took the bar, but she practiced law very little, but she didn't want to be a lawyer either. And everybody said, well, why don't you take the bar and fall back on law school and or on attorney has a good job, and I had already been in sales, and I said, even if the economy is bad, people always need a salesman, but I was like, I know I'll be a terrible lawyer. Like, I'll just be a horrible lawyer because it's so boring. I opened the torts book and I was just like, who cares about this stuff? So I just decided to ride my sales background. And, even my mentor, who is a billionaire, he told me to take the bar. And that was the one thing I disagreed with him. And I knew it wasn't in my heart. So, and I was right about that one thing. He was right about everything else in my life, but that one thing I knew would be a disaster if I was a lawyer. So, my first interviews were like, why aren't you becoming a lawyer? And I would just explain to them, you're getting somebody who's really smart. So, being a lawyer isn't, do you know any happy lawyers? And most of them would go, actually, no, I don't. So I was like, exactly. So I want to be happy, and I don't see being an attorney being a happy profession for me. I obviously now know a lot of happy lawyers. All my friends are lawyers from law school, but they got the joke, and then we moved on.
Interesting. So
yeah,
get done with all that, and then career path from then to now, where's that taking you?
Yeah. So what's interesting is what the debt did for me was it set limitations on what choices I had, which was a good and bad thing, right? I had to pay $5,000 a month for my debt every month. And so I knew I needed to make a certain amount of money very quickly, right? And so it drove me to move up. And, we talked about like getting promotions and moving from company to company and things like that. I did all of that out of necessity, right? And so it really set my focus because I needed to get out of that debt. And literally, I just paid the last student loan payment 2 days ago. So I'm in my 40s, just paid it off. But I haven't been paying it aggressively lately because the interest rates were low. So I went, from job to job and just moved my salary and, my responsibility and, relied on my sales and business development skills and just, kept knocking it out of the park. And, that's how, and just attacking the debt as aggressively as possible, bonus here, bonus there. And so what that also did, though, is it didn't leave a lot of room for savings. So, later on we'll talk, I don't have Roth IRAs, which I wish I did. And now my income is too high to have those unless I do, backdoor Roth or something like that. As soon as I could, I started saving 401k when it was available, things like that. But, my net worth didn't start to really spike until starting in around 2014. And then it's been kind of a steep climb since then.
Yeah, so you've never been a lawyer, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
In what field, for the most part? I mean, what advertising, would that be fair to say?
Yeah,
has been kind of the career path?
My first startup that I joined was an online advertising startup before, like right when online advertising was beginning. And for the most part, my career's been online for sure. I took a brief break into a different field online, but I went back into advertising, and my companies all surround tech and advertising. And I'm my own company owner now, and this is now my fourth 7-figure company. This is my biggest one now, but it's my fourth one at this point.
Nice. So is it fair to say Brad has gone from employee to law student? I wouldn't even say you're a recovering lawyer because you didn't really finish, practicing law at any given time, right? So a recovering law student to business, or I guess employee and business owner, to full-fledged entrepreneur to some degree, to fit the definition of starting multiple businesses at this point. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the transition to add some color, around 2013 or so, I was living at home because of a company that I had just started. Basically, they closed the office 2 weeks after I joined, and the guy that I was working for was told he had to move to the Midwest, and he knew I couldn't because I had just had a baby. And so that was my first taste of working from home. And that company was a disaster, but for me, but in terms of just, it was not fun, but it was the right place and the right time because I got to spend time with my daughter. But while I was there, I was looking for someone to kind of float me because I had bigger ideas. And this guy approached me and he said, I'll be your money guy. I'm in a different area of online. So we'll have a nice Chinese wall. You go build this business over here and I'll give you unlimited profit share or whatever. And so I said, deal. And I said, I need health insurance and a base pay, right? Because I've got wife and kids. And so that's when I started that company grew to, a pretty large company, but I had no equity. And when the company got really large and his company started to shrink, he moved over to the other side of the wall. It became very difficult. It was a very toxic situation. But while I was, so that company, I like to say is my company because it was, but it wasn't on paper. And at the peak of that company, I left. And I had no plan B. My spending had gone up. My wealth had gone up. Not my wealth, but my income had gone way up. I lost a ton of weight in like 30 days. I did no exercise, so I knew I was stressed. I knew it was the right decision. But then I was like, I'm going to go out on my own. That period, that was January 2017. And I just started consulting to pay the bills. And it was a crazy couple years. And bless my wife, like she's her dad's an entrepreneur. She's used to the entrepreneur life, but it got real stressful for a while. But she believed in me, and it turned around. And I came up with my quote $1 million idea in that hardship, and learned a ton, right? And at that time I started 2 companies. Both did really well, but one was super taxing, and the other one was scalable. And so in 2019, I started to wind the other business down, even though it was making a lot of money, because I didn't like the what I call the tech debt of that company. Really focus on my current company, and that was the best decision I could have made. So that's when my wealth really started to turn around. Was in 2018.
Nice. What do you think, I guess, top end income that you were making as W-2 before you left to go out on your own?
Yeah, I was making in the 300s.
Okay. So pretty healthy income. Mm-hmm. Paying the payments on the law debt still, right?
Yep. All of it going to that and a house, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm. When did you hit millionaire status before you left?
I hit millionaire status in 2019.
Wow.
I crossed the threshold in 2019. Most of that money, however, was real estate equity. My debt was going down, and my equity in my properties was going up, and so that's when that crossed over. I was at zero between 2014 and 2015. I hit the zero net worth. Wow. That year. So I was out of school for 6.5 years when I got back to zero.
Wow. Good for you. So, it's quite a journey, right? Even though you're going to co-host with me and we're going to do this together, but as a millionaire and kind of going through this interview with you so our audience can kind of get to know you a little bit better, it's a pretty remarkable story going from, undergrad, Midwest, packing it, all in the sales, working on all sorts of different sales items, Best Buy to timeshares to then law school to working as an employee, making $300,000, which in most cases, a lot of people would say that's a very high income, paying all your debt down that, I guess you probably expected to make that about that as a lawyer, I would imagine. And so you're making good income enough to shovels big enough that you can pay the debt, and then boom, walk away. I'm not a millionaire yet, but I'm going to go start this business, and I still have payments on this debt, by the way.
I went back to zero.
Yeah.
I was spending everything I had just to keep the lights on. But I think I think what's important is the things I've been battling, and this is why this podcast is so useful, because I listen to so many millionaires, and the reason you're the only person I've ever reached out to at a podcast was, it's good to hear other people, like where they went, especially the people that didn't just have an upward trajectory, right? And, for me, I'm battling two things. One, right? Like I'm battling like the mentality, like you just go get it. My parents are professionals. Your parents are professionals, right? Like you just go to school and that will take care of everything, right? But that's not necessarily the case. You need to know what to do with your money, and you need to make a certain amount of money. And then the second thing that I've really realized is I'm battling like scripts, like the poor mentality, the shove the money under the mattress mentality. And I've really wound back to, my mom, who manages the money for my dad. Like, she has a Great Depression mentality, and that came from growing up without money, and that came from her mom growing up in the Great Depression. Like, I remember going to my grandma's house and just drawers being full of Tupperware lids and like never throwing anything away, right? And that's the way that she managed her money. We still don't know how much money my mom has, and I don't think it's enough, right? And so I had to break that and really rewire the way my brain works, because that's what I default to when it comes to money, which is just give money over to someone and let them manage it. And now that I do the research, I know that that's not a good way to become wealthy, right? And then, the second thing is just understanding what makes, like, doubling down on your strengths and having trust in, like, I come from I think one of your guests, one of the best episodes was, I forget his name, but he did a lot with like debt instruments, and he talked about the cash flow quadrant. There's two books that really changed my mentality and set my business, and the first one was 4-Hour Work Week, and I read that every single year. And that's how I designed my business. So in 2017, I said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but my company's going to be remote. My time is not going to be connected to my money. And that was number one. At the time I was consulting, so it was hard, but I used a lot of the rules in that book to pick clients. And then the second thing, and it just came to me recently, is this cash flow quadrant book that was recommended from your podcast. I think it really added the second piece, which is now I have some money. What do I go from? In the quadrant, there's ESBI. That's the quadrant. And right now I'm squarely in the S and the B, but I'm not squarely in the I. And I really want to move to the I, because that's where wealth is made. And I've learned a lot of that from this podcast. So that's my mission for the next 10 years, is to become an I and not be so much an S and a B. A small business owner versus just, business operator, right?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable journey, and it's great to hear, especially in this kind of sense, that the trajectory that you've gone. So fast forward today, spending most of your time as a business owner, what's the net worth?
I mean, it's in the 2 range. I mean, it depends on if you want to put down the business. I don't actually put my business in my net worth calculation, but without the business, it's in the 2 area. And I have, that's mostly comprised of real estate. Let's see, most of my wealth right now, about 3 out, or I guess it's more like 60-40 in the real estate. So the investments have grown slowly, and they're starting to pick up. Obviously, it's shrunk quite a bit this year, but yeah, most of it's real estate.
And is that real estate that you own as a rental property, or is that primary residence, or a combination?
So I have so my primary home is some of it, but most of it is in actually 2 Airbnb investment properties that I have. One that I acquired last year, and another one I acquired the year before. So Airbnb is a big portion of it. And then my primary home is, say, half of that number.
Okay. In the Airbnb properties, did you buy those in cash or a large down payment?
Yeah, I used I used debt. I'm back in debt. So, but most of them I had, or both of them I had very good data on what I thought the returns could be, and I felt safe using debt. And luckily, it was at the time when interest rates were still low, so it's still pretty low rate, and and then they rent out pretty well, even with it's tightened up, but they're still doing well. They're still cash flowing.
And are those near your house? Do you self-manage them?
That's a great question. One of the things I put into my investment opus, as you will, is I kind of gave a multiplier to anything that was investable that I thought would also bring in life enjoyment. So I actually invest in collectibles. I invest in watches, and the Airbnbs are places I can go. So one is here in California. It's a resort area, and the other one's in the Midwest where I'm from, and I can go enjoy it with my family. And so I may not get the highest return out of it per se, but I'm also getting a life return out of it. So I get kind of a double benefit out of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And no money in the market?
No, I do have about 40% in the market between my 401ks. I use what's called a cash balance plan, which is a really useful tool for anybody who's self-employed, because it allows you to put away more pre-tax than a 401k, and then about 200,000 in savings.
Okay, and the money that's in the market, is that in mutual funds or index funds, or how's that broken up?
It's a mixture of individual stocks. I've got some Vanguard in there, and then I've got my wife's 401k, which is, if she leaves her company, we'll roll it over into a Vanguard immediately. Yeah, so I have probably half in stocks and half in index funds and mutual funds.
All right, cool. I want to touch on something you brought up earlier, and that was just how you grew up and the mindset and the shift that you have to go through today versus maybe what you normally did and what you normally default to. How do you do that? How do you transition from what you've been doing for, 30 plus years of your life to, hey, I'm going to have this mindset shift around money?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like in this category, personal finance, there is a lot of bad information. As a person who played golf at a very high level and taught people for years, 98, and you're a golfer, 99% of golf information is terrible information. And it's the same with personal finance. I still don't think I know everything or anywhere close to it, right? And there is a ton of bias in the information. So one of the things that law school gave me was the ability to read and consume a ton of information and go whittle it down and think both sides, right? And so I think that it did create a superpower. It wasn't all debt, right? And, as we've discussed offline, I've been reading almost a book a day in this category. And there is bad information in every single book, and being able to check all those books, but reading it voraciously, number one. And then number two, learning to separate my time from my income is essential. Making money while I sleep, right? That is number one. And, people who are consultants or employees, God bless them, that is not me. My rule early on, I learned this the hard way, was if a company has an HR department, it's already too big for me, right? I know where I fit. I am a rough person. I am not a person who can manage 1,000 people. I don't want to do that, right? So I limited where the areas where I could go. And then I said, okay, where can I scale in that pocket? And that has been really important. And then I think the second thing is just understanding what I'm weak at and then not accepting that. So when it comes to my background, I'm currently advising my sister who took over the practice. She's doing the same things my parents did. and I don't want her to end up the way that they did, right? And so teaching other people helps me get better at what I'm doing, right? Or what I'm saying. And I think that's also why I reached out to you, is just, every day you guys hear from somebody who has a completely different perspective, and that's so valuable. So the last piece is surrounding myself with people who don't think the way that I think. And that is really important. And they've all had success. So I'm in groups with other millionaires or other people who are running businesses and companies, and they're from all over the world, and they think completely differently than me. In my group, I have people who've come from nothing. I've had people who've come from jail who are super millionaire, like wealthier than I'll ever be. I have people that I surround myself with that, they're in retail, and farmers and things like that. And I find that essential. So that's why I sought out your podcast and loved it, because everybody on your podcast comes from different backgrounds. I think that's super important. You don't want yes men around you. You want to be around people who can call you on your baloney, right? And ask you critical questions. And that's super important.
Man, that's awesome. So one of the things that we discussed a little bit that might be unique, especially for you, other than, the background is phenomenal, but you're not the typical millionaire that maybe we've had on the podcast that's, hey, I'm a super saver, or hey, I done this or did that. Quite frankly, you would consider yourself more of a spender and kind of a free spirit that way. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say a free spirit. I still have my Midwest background, right? Like, I have a real tough time buying myself nice jeans, right? Like, you've had a lot of guests who talk about that, but I've spent enough time, and maybe your family's not the same, but like my family won't, they cook their burgers well done, right? I spend money on food. I spend money on things I really love. And, I've spent an obscene amount of money on food, and I've spent a lot of money on travel. Those are the things I care about. I could care less what car I drive. I've bought nice homes, things like that, because I spend a lot of time in my home. But, I definitely wouldn't call myself, I'm what do you call it? I'm frugal when I don't care, but when I do buy things, that I care about, I go all in. Like the collectibles thing, the watches, those types of things, I really enjoy them. So even if I only break even on them, I spend on watches, or I spend on food.
And why is it watches and food? Like, what are those specific things that have kind of triggered it for you?
Yeah, well, I'll just give you an example. Last summer I went on the trip of a lifetime for me, right? And it was supposed to be Japan before COVID, and we didn't end up going because of COVID. So we had more money saved up, and we went to a Michelin star restaurant in Europe, and it was unbelievable. It was every penny's worth, and it was an obscene amount of money for that dinner. But I'll never, ever forget it. So to me, it was worth every penny, right? In terms of the watch, I wear the watch every day. Like, I have a relationship with my watch. Like, every day I wind it, I talk to other collectors. And by the way, it has a huge amount of data behind it. And, I think watches, when done right, can be a good investment. So to me, it's like a double win. It's just like buying the property I bought in my first Airbnb property. I get to use it. And I went and looked for a data advantage, and I found a data advantage, and I became very secure in the investment. So I'm using it, but I enjoy it.
Today's episode is sponsored by FindLaw. FindLaw is the internet's top destination for free legal information for consumers and small businesses. Their nationwide attorney directory makes it easy to find the right attorney near you for your situation. FindLaw's legal forms and services allow you to create an estate plan affordably and from the comfort of your home. It is also the home of Don't Judge Me podcast, the show about the law in real life. FindLaw's Don't Judge Me has a lot of opinions, jokes, insightful guests, and in-depth discussions about hot topics in the law. What they do not have is a lot of pretension or corporate oversight. The hosts are lawyers and writers at findlaw.com, the primary online destination for all things legal. They hope you have as much fun listening as we have making it. Listen now on Apple Podcasts. To get free legal resources anywhere you are, head to findlaw.com. That's FINDLAW.com. And once again, thank you to Find Law for sponsoring today's episode.
You bring up a good point on being able to use some of these things. So maybe, you have a cash outlay of whatever that is, whatever the price is of a watch. But as you mentioned, it's something that drives benefit from an emotional standpoint and really to some degree a financial standpoint for you every day. And there's not many things I think that we
100%
invest in more or less that really give us a return like that every day.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. And this might be harder for the men on this podcast that listen than the women. But my wife she's shown me that, you can invest in a bag and the bag will appreciate. That is, to me, I'm like walking around and please don't buy this bag. But the bag is the equivalent for many women as the watch is. And that's her, it's going up in value. There's no question about it. A couple of the pieces she's bought, and she enjoys it every single day. So it's like my version of a sports car, I guess, right? Except it appreciates.
Interesting. So, Brad, as you transition here to kind of getting to that I quadrant as an investor, what's the outlook for you? Where are you headed? Are there any big goals, trips, things that you're really looking forward to as you kind of move into that next phase of life and career?
Yeah, we're definitely going back. We're going to go on another, baller trip this summer, probably to Europe or something like that. After we did it last year, we're not waiting again to do it again. That's for sure. And then investment wise, I've listened to a lot of people on this podcast too. It's like, I think I need to reserve some cash, cash meaning just liquid money for the right investment, buy another property, more into the stock market while it's low and so on. So I think it's going to be pretty simple for now. It's just going to be more of the same, but with the recession coming up, that could tighten everything up. So we're at the point now where we have enough cash to float us for a while. And so I'm not planning on having the same year I had this year next year, but I think it's just more of the same, I think, and getting better at the philosophy and sharpening the knife, right? Hanging out with and talking to people like yourself and just getting more knowledgeable. That's my main mission right now. Getting a data or knowledge advantage, I think will be huge.
Good stuff. Let's move into some rapid fire questions. What's the most expensive meal out that you paid for?
It was probably, just for my family, it was probably $1,500.
Oh, dang. What kind of restaurant was that at?
It was that Michelin. It was a Michelin star.
Okay.
And
okay.
It was worth every penny.
Wow, that's awesome. Would everybody in your family say that too?
Oh yeah,
it's a highlight.
I'll give you we had the craziest meal, as Michelin star should be, and the place was like, okay, we don't, you want to have the cheese course? It's going to sound so pretentious, but I was like, yes, we're going to do everything. And they're like, it's over in this other building across the street. And so what they were doing was moving us out so they could move the next group in. And the next place was a restaurant dedicated just to the chef's mother. And it was her pictures everywhere. And this table, think a miniature Harry Potter Hogwarts table of just cheese and chocolate and all the best things you could ever eat. And it was 2 more hours of just eating dessert and cheese. It was crazy. And it was all the other people who had just experienced the meal. And they were all kind of floating on cloud 9. And then it was just candle. It was just crazy. It was never been in anything like it. And, that's what you paid the extra money for. It was just an insane experience.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
What's the most expensive car you've purchased?
I bought a used Audi Q7. So, it was I don't know, 30 grand or something like that.
Okay. I probably should ask you, what's the most expensive watch?
I have probably a $20,000 Rolex.
Okay.
But being as I'm from the Midwest, I didn't buy it for 20. I got to get a discount.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah.
If you were to be a professor in college, what course would you teach?
Personal finance.
Okay. What vacation or experience?
Oh, and wait, before you say this, Chase.
Yeah.
The reason that would be the course is because I don't think that course exists. And I think, in America, I don't think there is a personal finance course. And I think everyone is undereducated in this area.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
What has been the most expensive experience or trip that you've paid for?
That trip last summer was multiple 10,000s. It was a very expensive trip.
Got more expensive while you were on it, and you didn't realize how much until you got home?
It did. My investments by my wife were made.
Hey, man, I know how that goes sometimes. You plan this trip, and it's like, I guess nowadays with the way we do kind of some of our online booking and stuff, you're able to really pay for a lot of the trip, or at least some of the trip, months and months and months in advance. But then the week of, or the 2 weeks of, or whatever, you always are kind of realizing you're spending probably a little more than maybe you thought you were going to, given that you thought you prepaid for a lot.
Yeah. Well, I kind of pre-saved for this trip, like doubly, because it was supposed to happen in 2020 and then 2021, and we didn't go. So, it was 3x trip, and we decided to go all out. But to your point, when I landed in Europe, that's when my intentions on the trip ended and my spouse's began, right? So it's fine. She had a great trip, and we're still okay. So
good.
She teaches me to spend my money every day.
Good. We're gonna have to have her on sometime too. And
she's got a great story. She does. If she'd ever opened up, my wife is an immigrant, and you talk about a come from nothing story. She's really lived it. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Brad, to wrap up here, what would be your last pieces of advice as we kind of move, into this new transition with you as co-host and things that you've maybe learned on the podcast or learned in your personal life that, at this point, podcasts got 275 episodes and millions of downloads. What would you tell the listenership?
So number one, and I think it's kind of a half advice and half thank you. It's a thank you to everyone else who opened up about their information, because that actually has made a difference in my strategy and my investments. So this podcast has made a difference. Keep adding information, and don't stop learning. That's super important. And then the second one, if you look at my numbers, I haven't gone up because of the stock market. The stock market, I haven't invested well that way. But even if you're at zero and you're asking your mom for some money, or you're at the last check, if you believe in what you're doing, just keep doing it but have people around you to tell you no and to tell you yes. If I listened to my mom, I wouldn't have become a timeshare salesman, and I wouldn't have learned how to sell. All of those things have added and given me superpowers to, where I am now. But if you talk to the Brad in 2018, who was just in a mountain of debt and started a company, and whether I made a good decision, it was a very hard to say yes at that point, right? It was a grind. And, thankfully I'm where I am right now, but it could have gone both ways. And so I've heard other people on this show had similar, quick rise scenarios, and I think they would probably all tell you, like, coming from nothing or putting yourself in a nothing situation, you can make bad decisions. But all of my bad decisions are from bad information, right? Going to law school is a good education. That sort of thing. Like that's an incomplete thought. So just keep adding information and you're going to have an outsized advantage. So that's why I think data and information advantage is so important. And I think that's the key.
Awesome. Well, everybody, this is Brad, new co-host. Thanks for coming on the podcast and sharing your new millionaire story. And look forward to many, many episodes together here in 2023.
Thank you for inviting me, Jace. It's an honor.
We're going to shift gears here just a little bit. I've had a lot of interest and actually emails that have come in wanting to know a little bit more about the host. And so I thought I'd take this moment to, beginning of 2023 to dive in a little bit. 2 years ago, I basically went on my own show to some degree, and Clark interviewed me and my wife. That was episode number 161, and it was very in-depth. I think I did almost an hour and a half interview on kind of my journey, to millionaire status and everything that I've done along the way and portfolio allocation, all that fun stuff. So not going to go into all the details like I did then, but thought we'd take this opportunity now that Brad is joining me to give a little update and kind of let the tables turn a little bit and let Brad interview me. So Brad, I'll let you take it away at this point.
All right, Jace. I'm not nervous to interview you, but so episode 161 was approximately 2 years ago. What does your portfolio look like today? Like the allocation, has anything changed? What's different?
Yeah, it's a good question. And as we get into the year end here, these are things that I dive a little bit more deep into. I still do my net worth every month. I essentially kind of try to run my life and finances much like I would in my businesses, where I've got financial reporting monthly. And some people maybe think it might be a little overkill, but at any rate, I do it. It doesn't take me very long. I've got the templates built, and so it goes pretty quickly. So if I go back and I look at 2020 when I did that interview, the allocation that I had at the time, I was a little more heavy in business, upwards of 36% at that time. Had about 30% in retirement accounts, and then 20% in real estate. That was basically investment real estate, and about 6% of my primary and 7% in cash. And of the money that I had invested in the market at the time, 57% of that was in a Roth, 25% rounded down was in a traditional, and then 17% was in HSA. Fast forward to 2022, and ironically, those percentages between my money that's invested in tax advantage accounts has not really changed. I'm 57% in Roth, 27 or 26% in traditional, and 17% in HSA. The one major shift from an allocation standpoint overall is my net worth has substantially grown and got more business equity now than I did then. Depending on how you value businesses right now, it's a kind of a crapshoot to some degree, but what I've kind of pieced together is I'm probably down about 26% in business. I've got 12% in retirement. I've got a little bit extra that I've been putting away in essentially a taxable brokerage account. So that's just around 2%. And then I've got 28% in real estate. And part of that is I've added some properties over the last couple of years. I did sell one earlier this year in March. And so I guess March 2022, I did sell one that was used personally, but then it was also used as an Airbnb. And so, and then got about 10% now with some of the equity run up, even with rates dropping for primary residence. But that leaves me with a significant amount of cash compared to where I normally have been. That's a little over 22%. And that's been like that for a while. I had a liquidity event last year and selling a good chunk of one of my businesses that I was a shareholder in. And I haven't really done much with that since then, other than putting a little bit in the market. And, we enjoyed a little bit of it, went on some vacations and stuff, but really just been parking that because, one, I didn't have any other great place to put it. And two, after having a 13-year bull market, I started getting a little nervous, which I guess you never should be a nervous investor, but I just didn't really see great opportunities. I still had a lot of other business stuff going on, and I've recycled some of that cash. So yeah, I've got a lot of cash just sitting on the sidelines that at some point I want to do something with that I normally don't have that kind of cash sitting on the sidelines. So
on the investment side, you mentioned your allocations haven't changed that much. Are you contributing more to the traditional than you had in the past because like you're phasing out on the Roth limitations, or are you able to continue to contribute to that Roth?
Yeah, so that's great. That's a great question. And the Roth, I still just do a backdoor Roth, and every year I do the debate, and then I still fund it. In terms of just not doing it anymore and just letting it kind of ride out. The traditional money that I've got set aside, I've actually never ever contributed to a traditional 401k or IRA. All of that has been essentially match money that's come from companies. And so that right now is still housed so that I'm able to do the backdoor Roth in essentially an old 401k plan at this point. I've kind of moved all that over because you can get dicey doing a backdoor Roth if you've got traditional IRA money out there as well. So
do you recommend backdoor Roth when you're in a high income year?
It's the only way you can contribute to a Roth, really. But, personally, I've always thought about the Roth because I've had that account forever, that, I want to keep growing that as much as possible because, the money's been taxed. So as long as it keeps growing and grows at a significant rate, the money's tax free forever. So, I mean, you look at, I think Peter Thiel and Mitt Romney are probably the two famous ones that got, several $1 million, upwards of 100 or a couple hundred or more in a Roth. And while I don't think I'll ever get there with my Roth, but I would love to continue to grow that. I have not personally self-directed any of it yet, which is how they basically have been able to grow theirs that quickly. But it's something that I've considered and may do now that balance is getting to a level that I'm comfortable with, but potentially taking some out, and not out, but just self-directing it and move it into some of my private business investments or something.
Interesting. Yeah, I've been thinking about that on my end as well, and just didn't know how to do it. So that's why I come on the podcast to learn from you. On the real estate side, you said you let go of one property, and you have a couple other properties. Do you see yourself holding into cash for the right opportunities, or is it really all about the recession and fear and that sort of thing?
A little bit of both. I think as real estate's ran up, it's been hard to find deals over the last, couple years. I bought a couple of different pieces of land. One, I live in Austin, and my wife and I were discussing if we wanted to move to a certain area or this area or whatever. It was like, well, we better lock up some land if we want to do that down the road. And, whether or not that's going to be a great investment, I don't know, but it was more of an emotional decision to go ahead and do that with, future plans to build a home or possibly move. And then I bought a house that's turned into a rental in another state, which is a long story, but that one's cash flowing real nicely right now. And I've got it at a really good rate because it closed on that before rates really started getting crazy. And then got a couple other rentals. So I think I'll keep my real estate portfolio the way it is. I don't really think that I'll be adding much to it at this point. I really, I'm getting to a stage of life, I guess now, where some things, there's been a little bit of shift. And I talked about it a little bit with my wife, I guess, on our previous episode. But where I started to realize that I can only have certain experiences at certain ages. And so I want to make sure that I capitalize on that. And one of those is not putting off buying, or building the dream house or putting together what we may want for our family until I'm, 50 or something, when my kids are like grown or nearly out of the house. So those have been some conversations she and I have had more lately to see when the right time to kind of strike that. And we got, my oldest is going to be 5 here soon. And, I got 3 kids, so we're fine where we are now, but there's definitely, I got my rower in my office. I got my treadmill in my bedroom, and I got a Peloton bike in our living room. And then my Rogue set up in my garage, and my wife and I, it's kind of a little bit ridiculous, but it's kind of like, this is what we bought. I bought this house 3 years ago, and we only had one kid, and here we are now. So, those are kinds of things and conversations, and making sure that we capitalize on experiences that, we're only going to have at certain ages.
All that exercise equipment will definitely keep you around longer, though. I think
it will.
I have a cake in every room, unlike you. So that's pretty impressive. My kids are 11 and 10, and I can tell you that the decisions get harder as they get older because they make friends, they have school, all that sort of thing. So I think that's really forward thinking of you guys to be thinking about that at that young of an age, for sure.
Yeah, the one thing I will say that I guess is changed is just the planning for the kids. We set up ESAs, which obviously have income limits, but there's some unique ways that you can contribute to those through corporations and whatnot that I've done to fund those. Recently, we just had the 529 changes, so that's something now that I'm contemplating more than I did before. Just the investment options of those just weren't great. I didn't really love them. Transfer options weren't great, so it was hard for me to really get on board with those. But getting that kind of planning started for all my kids is something that over the last 2-3 years since the first recording that we've gotten a little more intentional on and plan to continue to do so to plan for them in their future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm way behind on the ESA 529 decision. I'm in the process of setting that up. I haven't come to a conclusion. I don't think there's a perfect option. So I would love to learn more about what you're doing there, because there's no ideal option in either vehicle, I think. Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, it sounds like you're, steady the course. That's a fine strategy. There's sometimes when it's ain't broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, no, and the strategy hasn't changed at all. I mean, I'm still pretty committed to having a third in the, real estate realm and a third in the, small business, essentially private business, equity ownership, and then a third in essentially tax advantaged or, the market. So I kind of like my three-legged stool. Obviously that cash chunk is always going to fluctuate, and same with home equity or whatever, but sure. I like it, and it's proven to be comfortable for me and my wife at this point. And so I think we'll continue, and there may be a point where, the private business stuff gets a little bit more, significant as a portion of the portfolio, but I enjoy that. It's fun for me. Over the last couple of years, it's gotten even more fun for me, as I'm sure it has for you. So those are things that I see taking shape, over the next couple of years and changing a little bit.
Right on. Well, it's an honor to interview you and be on the podcast. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Look forward to interviewing our future millionaires. I'm going to bring a bunch to the table myself. Look forward to a long relationship with you. I'm super excited.
Yeah, me too. It's gonna be a great journey. We got a lot of good stuff in store for 2023. I'm super, super, super pumped.
Thanks for listening to the Millionaires Unveiled podcast with Clark Sheffield and Chase Mattinson. For more stories, investment opportunities, and information, check out our website at millionairesunveiled.com. See you next time when you'll hear from another everyday millionaire.